At Rubberband, we empower each other through positivity, kindness, and practical advice. Join a community of thousands of peers who understand the unique challenges you face. Rubberband. Company agnostic, low ego, high empathy, always supportive. And we are live. Welcome, listeners, to today's episode of the Rubberband podcast, which is another episode within the Talent Tech series. Today, I am joined by extra special guest, Steve Gard from BenchmarCX. Now, before we begin, I would like to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I live and work on, the Wadawurrung and Dja Dja Wurrung people. I recognise their continuing connection to the land and waterways. I pay my respects to their elders past, present and emerging, and I would like to extend this to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. Welcome. I was almost going to say my old friend, which is a terrible faux pas for both of us. Welcome, my good friend, Steve Gard. How you doing, mate?
I'm very good, Eden. Thank you for your introduction. And leaving out the word old. I appreciate it.
Oh, no, well, I didn't leave it out. I mean, I just did the faux pas within the faux pas, right? And, I think I'm probably older than you as well. So, I'll say you're my young friend, the young Steve Gard. Welcome.
Brilliant. Let's restart that, edit that, take that bit out.
Oh, who has time for editing these days, Steve? Mate. Now, always with my episodes of the podcast, we start by going back to the young Steve, the Steve growing up. Where are you from originally, Steve?
So I'm originally from the UK. I was born in Surrey, raised in Hampshire, so the south of the UK.
The south of the UK. There we go. And what brought you to Australia and when?
We moved to Australia in 2016. So I met my now wife in London. So she was over on a 2-year working holiday visa from Australia. And part of the deal was if we ever end up together, we have to live in Australia. Right. 10 years later, 2 kids later, we finally arrived. But that was, we had a 6-year stop off in the Middle East. So we worked in the Middle East for 6 years before that.
Oh, wow. So were you working in recruitment at the time? Like where did your career take you from, growing up in the south of England, right? Like tell me, did you study human resources? How did you move into the recruitment industry?
I did study human resources. So let me take a step back. My first year of uni, I was doing business studies and didn't do particularly well. And so they said, you need to do retakes in the summer. So I did retakes, and I've never been very good at maths and things like that. And I'd failed economics and a few other elements of it. And they said, look, we're starting an HR degree. Would you be interested in coming back and doing that? And I said, yeah. Because I'm enjoying university life. And actually, it was a really good fit. So I did an HR degree, and then actually really, really wanted to get into recruiting, funnily enough. I'm one of those few that I actually quite enjoyed that aspect of the course, the degree. So my very first job was working at Manpower on the high street in Guildford in Surrey. And I was running the drivers and industrial desk, all temporary staff. So, that was way back in, that would have been 2000 where are we now? 2000? No, it wasn't 2000. What am I saying? 1996.
Oh wow!
Yeah, so pre-internet, or just as internet was coming out.
Wowee! And what was it when you were studying the degree and something made you go, do you know what? Recruitment is something I'd love to explore, as you mentioned. What was that? What was that desire, and why? Why were you passionate about it? It's at such a young age, right? Like, I mean, you've stayed in the industry and you've had such a great career. You've become a founder. There's something there what made you go, I think this is where I need to focus.
I think it was really what interested me was that I'm quite a competitive person, right? I think it was that competitiveness around how do you get the best talent? How do you beat other organizations to talent? And I always sort of saw it as a bit of a competition to some extent. And I think that's probably, thinking back, that's probably what I enjoyed most. And, the idea that actually you can make and break organizations with great people, finding them, hiring them, the whole process. I'm quite a process orientated person. That whole sort of process of how you do that I just found it really interesting. I think also I found some of the other stuff less interesting as well. Which helped drive me down the route of recruiting. I don't think I could really have seen myself as an HR business partner. I don't think I've got the skill set for that.
Oh, I think you do, but the thing is whether you want to, right? Like I've done it. I've led a business partnering team. In my role at Flybuys, I had the whole HR life cycle. Would I go back to business partnering? We can do it, and we can do it really well. But I think it's what drives us, and I'm like you, I'm a results person, and I like to work at pace, and business partnering can be a very gentle process, and a bit of a slow burn to get where you need to go, whereas recruitment, you can really drive it and energize it and work at that pace that really helps you thrive. But
it has a very clear outcome, right, as well. That's which right. I think is really you've achieved something where, I think that's probably why.
There's an end goal.
Really
there's definitely an end goal. Yeah. And competitive people need an end goal because they want to smash it, and then they want to get to the end goal faster and in better quality and all of that kind of stuff, right? So completely relate to that. When you hit the desk at Manpower, was the reality what you expected? Were there any surprises, or did you go, do you know what, this is the dream that I thought it was going to be?
Let me think back to that. I mean, it was exactly what I thought it would be. We were quite lucky in a way at the time because we had some fairly big contracts. So knowing what I do now, because I then went on to other agencies and did sort of IT, which was 50% or more actual business development, and we didn't really have to do business development. So it was at that point in my second job, actually, where I wasn't doing the actual sort of recruiting or resourcing so much. It was getting jobs in and getting specs in. It was probably at that point I realized, actually, this isn't the right path for me. And that's when I went in-house. So Manpower was a bit different, really, because it was really just resourcing of jobs because we had some big contracts, which is what I loved. That, and it gave me a really good foundation, actually, because I was quite shy and quite timid back in those days, and I, really struggled to pick up the phone and talk to people. And that first job at Manpower really helped me do that, and become a little bit more confident in what I was doing.
And tell me about the transition to in-house. I actually coincidentally had an agency recruiter reach out to me for some advice on how to transition to in-house just today. How did that all come about for you? I mean, I'm sure that person's probably listening because they said they listened to the podcast, so we might be able to give them some advice in live time.
Yeah, it was really interesting. When I did it, there was a real. I think it's different to what it is now, but it was it's very difficult to make the move from agency to in-house. The in-house world tended to look at sort of agency recruiters at the time as salespeople. And it was a really, really hard move to make. And it took me quite a while to be able to land a role that helped me make that move. I think it's completely flipped now. I think in-house teams love agency recruiters for their ability to source and network and all that sort of stuff, which is stuff that I don't think in-house teams really recognized back then. I'm talking 2000 and early 2000s. So I managed to land a role, and I was actually thrown in at the deep end. It was a brand new standalone role hiring sales staff nationally for a very large industrial workwear and I'll tell you what, Rentokil Initial, essentially. So they were doing sort of washrooms and workwear, and they had 50, 60 different branches across the UK, and all of their sales was being managed by individual managers in each one of those departments or those locations, and there wasn't any sort of consistency, and there was a bit of a lack of approach, really. So I was thrown in the deep end, reported strangely to the head of sales, not HR. I was actually outside the HR function to build a process and run it. So I was sort of really thrown in the deep end, and lots of objection handling there with, taking away a process from people that have been doing it themselves for years. But yeah, it's fascinating role. I love that.
If you're a podcast host or someone wanting to be interviewed on podcasts as a guest, visit podmatch.com. Podmatch automatically connects ideal podcast guests and hosts together for interviews. We always say it works just like a dating app, but instead of connecting you for dates, it connects you for podcast interviews. Podmatch has connected over 85,000 guests and hosts together for interviews that listeners love, all while saving you countless hours of administrative work through built-in automations. If you're ready to level up your podcast interviews on either side of the mic, start today by visiting podmatch.com.
Fabulous. And then your in-house career, like, give me a little bit of a summary of the sort of, because you've had such a great variety of experience. Where did that lead you? What kind of roles have you been in? I just want to hear a little bit more about your experience up until Circle Back, and we'll talk about that in a moment.
Yeah. So after that role, I then went into I felt like I needed an in-house team. I needed a talent acquisition leader to really sort of take me to that next level, because I was doing it from just what I knew. And again, I wasn't linked to any HR or TA teams at Rentokil. So I went in-house to an IT consulting company and did. They were doing sort of business transformation work around SAP, so they'd implement SAP for big customers, and I was leading managing the business transformation management consultants that go in and do all the business change part of it, and then and that was great, and then went to British Telecom, BT, and I started doing exactly that again. So I was doing business transformation management consulting staff. So they, at the time, BT were doing or rolling out the major network for the National Health Service. So everything with the National Health Service is all coming online. BT were bringing in the infrastructure for that as well. Needed lots of management consultants. So I was doing that, and then was asked to pick up the role of head of graduate and internship recruitment. So a year before BT had disbanded that team during the global financial crisis and said, we're not doing graduate recruitment anymore. And then a year later said, actually, we want to do it again. Can you build it from scratch? And that was really a pivotal change in my career. That was my first sort of proper leadership role, strategic role. I wasn't necessarily delivering, but we were building all of the attraction, everything from scratch, and that was the bit that really changed my career. Forever thankful to my manager at the time, who's still a good friend. That really did change it all.
Yeah. I don't know how you do early careers. I shouldn't put this on record, but my word, it's hard work. I'm like, run a mile. Early careers in the portfolio, forget it for me at the moment, but who knows?
I learned so much in that period that sat with me for years, because it's incredible. You've got hundreds and hundreds of employers all recruiting at the same time in a finite pool of people.
Yeah.
And it just really, really pins down and hammers home how important your attraction strategy's got to be. You get it wrong, and it can last for years. BT is a good example, right? We didn't go on to campus during that global financial crisis. A year later, we wanted to, and it was really hard to get the brand back and build those relationships up again. We managed it, but it wasn't easy. But I found it fascinating. I think it's one of the hardest types of recruitment that you can do.
It is. And like the hours and even the financial investment and the amount of resourcing you need to throw at it, like it's a big beast, right? It's
just go to one of the careers fairs. I remember the first one we went to. We were looking for management consultants, right? Which BT, a telecoms company, isn't really well known for. And we were not looking for them, but trying to get people like that, and so people that wanted to go into consulting into our graduate scheme. And we were next to Deloitte, KPMG, PwC, and us in the middle. We're like, what? I just couldn't, it's like incredible how competitive it is and how you've got to stand out. And
then, you've had roles in the Middle East and Australia as well. And, at some point, Circle Back came about. But before we go into that, tell me what are you most, and I think most listeners will know this, but for those who haven't met you, I suppose, like what are you most passionate about in the industry with all the experience that you've had at a leadership level in different regions? Tell me about that. Like what's really driving you to change, the industry holistically?
Yeah. Well, anybody that's read my stuff or heard from me before, it's all about candidate experience for me. It's always been central to the strategies that I've implemented. So it really makes or breaks everything we do in recruiting. In my view, it's the foundation of everything. You can have a brilliant attraction strategy. You can have, the best selection methodology and assessment. But if the candidate doesn't like it or like you, they're not joining anyway. So it's all for nothing, and they're not going to join your talent pool if you don't give them a great experience. And that for me, I've been in leadership roles where I've worked for not-for-profits. I've worked for for brands that are not as well known as well as some that are really well known. And candidate experience levels the playing field for everyone. It's something that doesn't matter what budget you have, doesn't matter what brand you have, it doesn't matter even what role you have. You can always compete on candidate experience, even with the big players out there. So it's the one thing for me that A is the foundation, but B levels the playing field, and everybody can have a crack at the same level. And that's why for me it's really, really important. I think it's central to everything we do.
It is, but I mean, you think about it logically, and you think, okay, well, of course, right? We're human beings. We want to treat candidates with dignity and respect, and we want to be representing our brands in a positive way, so we're not impacting whether it's customer experience or client experience, depending what industry you're working in, right? Why have we got this wrong? Like, because for me, it doesn't make sense. Like, is this, if people who are not delivering a good candidate experience, is that deliberate? Are there factors that are at play? Like what are the basics that we need to get right?
I mean, I don't think everybody's getting candidate experience wrong. I think there's lots of organizations that are doing it very, very, very well. And I think part of the issue with this is the thinking that you've delivered a good candidate experience because you've managed to fill jobs, or that your hired people tell you it was great. For me, that's like I've got this analogy. It's like asking a radio competition winner who their favorite station is live on air when you've just given them a prize. They're always going to say you, right? And that's the issue with asking hired candidates what their candidate experience was like. It's going to be favorable, but you're rejecting potentially thousands of other people, hundreds of other people. What do they say about it? So often we find that you fall into this trap of thinking you deliver a good candidate experience, but actually you've got no idea because you can't see how other employers or other candidates are rating other employers looking for the same skills. And that's where benchmarks came from. The idea of benchmarks came from many years ago. So, there's I wouldn't say very few, but there's not many organizations percentage-wise out there that actually do measure candidate experience, something like 40%. So even starting to measure it is a start. But yeah, it's often the reliance on sort of brand name as well. So often big names will say, we don't need to worry about candidate experience. We can always hire. But then, it's that impact of, okay, well, how does that actually affect things like revenue? If we're treating customers who are candidates badly, what's that costing us? Actually, could we create more revenue from doing that? So it's really looking beyond just the ability to hire, which I think a lot of organizations don't do. They just worry about filling the job. Yeah,
totally. And I'm curious as well, like when you had this idea for the BenchmarCX platform, was that born out of the Circle Back initiative? Like I remember when you launched Circle Back, and I think I was one of the first companies to join it back in the day. I could have even been. I was definitely in the first 10. I can't remember what number.
You might even been in the first 5, but maybe. You're definitely first 10.
Yeah, I remember that. So tell me about that journey of launching Circle Back and then how it led to benchmarks.
Yeah, so I left my last head of role. I'd done a big transformation of their function, and it was time to look for something else. And I actually went out and started doing some strategic consulting around TA processes and transformation. Then obviously COVID hit, and nobody really needed that skill and that service. And that's really when Circle Back started, which is, for those that don't know, it's a community of employees that basically commit to respond to every applicant. And I started that during COVID because we were seeing the mental health impact of people being made redundant and then applying for jobs and not hearing anything. During that time, I'd also started to think, it really sort of underpinned why candidate experience, not just from a nice thing to do and the ability to hire and all that sort of stuff. It's a duty. I think it's a duty of care. If you're asking people to apply for jobs or you're putting jobs out there, it's a duty of care to actually treat them with respect. But I sort of thought, okay, well, so what's next on my journey? And gathering candidate experience had always been really, really clunky in the past for me. In my previous roles, I sort of dipped in and out of it because it was just too hard to get started, too time consuming to look at all the analysis. But it comes back to that point of not being able to see how the candidate experience you're delivering compares to other employers. And it all, there was a point in my career where we had done some SurveyMonkey surveys, and I presented this data to our C-suite. Actually, I was lucky enough to sit in front of the C-suite once. Said, "Hey, look at this data. It looks like we've got a great candidate experience." And one of the C-suite put their hand up and said, "That's great, but compared to who? How do we know it's great when we can't see what the experience is that our competitors are also giving those candidates? Yes, we're able to hire, but who have we lost? Who didn't apply? Who hated our careers website? Who walked out of an interview and went, no way?" So we can't say it's great unless we've got a benchmark. And that's really where benchmarks came from. And so that, while I had a bit of time during COVID, it sort of said, okay, now's the time to build this. And that's really where it came from.
And I think it's fab because it was a challenge for me. If I go back to flybys where we really elevated candidate experience. We were going as far as, any candidate that was coming for interview would receive flybys points as part of that process, and measuring what impact that had on their consumer activity, right? And we were asking the question is, did their experience actually lift, their engagement within the flybys program? All great and really great data, right? And really positive data. But did that impact them using Woolworths rewards? And what was their candidate experience like? We didn't know. So it was all good to say, look at all this wonderful work we're doing, and this is how we're measuring it, and this is the impact it's having to our consumer base. But we had no insight in terms of what our main competitor was doing. So for me, it completely makes sense, right? So, if you are an internal talent acquisition leader or professional, how do they engage with benchmarks? Like, how does it link in with their current processes? How do they look at that market insight and comparison? Tell me about that.
Yeah. Well, one of the I'm not a techie, so I didn't design. I designed it, but I didn't build this, right? So, but the reason for mentioning that is one of the key criteria I said to the developers when we designed it. I said it's got to be really, really easy to get started and start using this, because TA leaders are busy. Candidate experience is always top of mind, but low on priority in terms of measuring, because just so many other things come into play every day. You never really get to do it properly. So this has got to be really, really, really easy to use. So what we have is a number of what we call benchmarked surveys. So these are surveys that all the employers on the platform use. And they're they're branded individually for each employer, but every single survey is exactly the same across all employers, which means that we can do like for like benchmarking. So when you're, for example, we have a survey that goes in your application acknowledgement email, and it literally is just a link that you plug into your email template that you send out. We've got some nice wording that we recommend. And it's as simple as that. So as soon as you just put the survey links into your email templates that you're already sending out, it all runs in the background. So you don't need to integrate with an ATS. We don't collect any personal data. We don't touch your candidate records in any way. So that link goes into that email template. The candidate clicks on it. They rate their application experience and what was the job ad like? What was the career site like? How easy was it to apply? We've then got some sort of filtering questions in there as well, so we can ask things around, what type of role did you apply for? Your location. We can even ask things like gender, whether they're living with a disability. And the idea of those is to be able to see, is there any discrepancy in experience by different groups?
Oh, amazing.
So really, really easy to use. And basically, everyone gets two surveys, when they apply and then where they exit the process. So we've got one where they got a survey where candidates are screened out before interview, and then after interview, and hired. And then actually customers then said, actually, we'd like to start benchmarking onboarding and exits. And we've got those as well. And you can even benchmark hiring manager experience. So how does your hiring manager rate your service versus other TA teams in different locations? But literally, you then just log into your results dashboard, and it's all there in real time in graphical format. You can very quickly see, red, amber, green. So you have a line for, let's use the application experience one again. You'll have a line showing your overall score. You'll have a benchmark showing the average score across all the other employers. You can see if you're above or below it. So very visually, it tells you, okay, we're not as competitive, or actually we're doing really well. Right at the start of the process, you can then segment it by, well, I only want to see people that apply for accounting roles, or I only want to see other companies in my industry. You never get to see the other companies. You see the average across them all. And then you can actually go into the survey and go, okay, well, what is driving that? So every single question we ask in the survey is also benchmarked as well. So we a good example of this, how you can use this data, is we had quite a few stories of recruiters going into briefing sessions, taking benchmarks data in. So we have one for unsuccessful candidates after interview, and being able to show that and saying to hiring managers, look, when we hire this role, we are below benchmark of other employers hiring this role for the way that we sell and talk about the role and the opportunity in the interview. Can we talk about how we can improve that? Can I help you with some talking notes? Is there anything else that we can do to really sort of elevate this to make us more competitive? So it's all about making sure you haven't just got a good candidate experience, you've got a competitive one on all levels.
Amazing. Well, Steve, as we're coming to the end, I'm just would really love to know what's new and what's next.
Yeah, so we've just launched a graduate recruitment version of the platform. So graduate recruiters can now benchmark candidate experience. It's different to the experience hiring module because it's we've got different stages, but also different filters. So you can filter by university, you can filter by degree. Nice. So that's just gone live, and we're just about to roll out benchmarking of HR and recruitment technology. So we'll be coming out to lots of heads of HR and heads of TA to rate we're going to start probably with ATSs, rate their ATSs. And then we'll be able to share and benchmark that data as well. And that's useful for being able to understand which of the companies I should shortlist and look at based on, other companies of a similar size or other TA teams of a similar size or hiring a similar number.
I think that's a fabulous idea, Steve. And I'll tell you, I've just been through this process, and there's so much out there. It's hard to know who's using it. I had to reach out and say, who's using it? Can you tell me about your experience? That, hours of man time, right? As much as, I love speaking to people, there's only so many hours in the day. But then also, if you were to go down the path of engaging a consulting firm to help you with that, it's incredibly expensive. And sometimes the cost of that outweighs the cost benefit of actually shifting platforms in the first place. So there's a lot of moving pieces. If you're able to, myself as a talent leader, be able to jump in and see, these technologies benchmarked and real experience from real recruiters, I think that's the key. People that are actually on the tools and using it. I think it's really, really clever, Steve. Would I have used it 2 months ago? Yes. And it would have saved me a lot of time.
Well, that's it. That's the idea, is to cut through the noise. And really, it's about how often I often see, which is the best ATS that I should look at. Well, it really depends, right? It depends on your industry, how many people you're hiring, how big's your team, what do you want it to do. This will all help. So you'll be able to sort of go, well, I only want to look at companies that hire 500 people a year. What are they using? I'll say only 500 people a year. That's a lot, but it's going to be out. You're going to be able to segment it, and it's not there to make the final decision. It's there to help you sort of shortlist who should I speak to. That's it.
It's where do you start? There's so much out there, and we've all seen those charts that people share on LinkedIn about all the technology providers and all that. There's hundreds of them, right? Like it's a lot to navigate, and quite often people have to do that on their own whilst recruiting. So I think that's fabulous. Steve, it's been so great catching up with you today, as always. Really appreciate you taking the time to tell us more about benchmarks. And everyone out there, Steve's very active on LinkedIn. He's very easy to engage with. So reach out to him. You should be interested if you're not already. Check it out. Steve, so great to catch up. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Ethan. Thanks for having me. Really appreciate it.
Take care.